I am going to take a peek in the Q&A and see what we have. We still have time. The questions. Somebody just ordered me a box of M&Ms. Brian said JV. So Justin at HSC, thank you. I'm struggling. It's summer and I love chocolate. So thank you for my M&Ms. Dustin said, should I invest in popcorn futures ahead of tomorrow's debate? That's a really good question. I mean, I know Dustin's joking. The debate isn't going to change, obviously, 30% on both sides. We know who they're voting for. I'm going to watch the debate. I don't know, because I don't really have a dog in the fight. You know, it's almost unfortunate that they're cutting off the other person's mic. You know, the 2016 and 2020 debates were entertainment. I don't know if it gave us most, you know, any hope. But it will be popcorn viewing. I'm curious to see what it does to the polls, because again, we got to watch the independent voters. They're going to decide this election. They're not, in general, independent voters do not care about the extreme social issues. Right or wrong, you can have your opinions on that. They care more about the direction of the country and which person they believe will keep us in the general right direction. So I'll do that. So I'll jump to Anonymous asking more debt when the government is split. He asked, or she asked, how much of that debt is because the government is split more often than one party controls it? In other words, if the government is split more often than it isn't, I would expect more spending in the time when it is split. Absolutely. And that's kind of what we've seen. And one thing that I'll probably put in the blog lately is, and I brought this up a whole lot during the 2020 election, is pretty much every election except I forget which one, maybe 2004 or 2012, no, 14. We had at least one chamber or the White House flip parties, which coincidentally is the time when we've seen the number of independents rise and the number of people affiliated with one of the parties fall. So the reason we see that is definitely we have more time in a split government. So definitely that's what's going to happen with the debt, is they're going to be split. They're not going to be able to get everything done. There's built-in things. Do you think Social Security and Medicare is going to be reformed, you know, quickly, if everybody is afraid of losing the election in 2 years in the House or in every 6 years in the Senate? So we definitely have seen more time split. We may see a change election this time, although I think the chances this time of one side winning is going to be much more likely, because the polls are being driven by how you feel about President Trump or President Biden, and that's kind of where we're at with that. Another good question from Brian is, can we extend the life of Social Security and Medicare by increasing the wage limit and increasing FRA? And I think definitely Simpson-Bowles, I believe it was 2010 or 12, was a joint committee. I've seen people there pushing to get another joint committee going. The problem with joint committees is typically they require like 65 or 70% of the members to vote to change anything. And typically that doesn't mean that, you know, you can get anything changed. But what they found was, you know, I forget what the cap is this year on Social Security, but up to a certain point, you definitely you pay into Social Security, you pay into Medicare all the time, but you hit that cap and you stop paying into Social Security. And what they found was if they just remove that cap, and it's 140, 150,000, somewhere around there, you know, most Americans don't ever hit it, but there's definitely the top 15 to 20% of Americans that exceed that. The studies have shown you could get like another 20 years just by removing that cap. Now, President Biden and the Democrats are proposing getting rid of it for people over 400,000. I'm sorry, President Biden. The Democrats have said, what if we did 250? And the reason Biden is saying 400,000 is because the he made a campaign promise that he wouldn't raise taxes on anybody who made less than $400,000 as a family. But definitely, Brian, you could add at least 20 years to Social Security and Medicare if you just got rid of that gap. You could actually add another 15 years if you started taxing partnership income for Social Security and Medicare. You might have heard of something called the carry interest loophole. SEM's an investment manager, but we're paid fees. That's revenue. We're an S corporation, so the owners of the corporation pay that as regular income. So even though it's a dividend from the company, that's taxed against Social Security and Medicare. That's paid as income. So we get, hit with that. But if we were a hedge fund or a private equity fund or anybody in that, our income from fees would just go into capital gains, and we would not pay any Social Security or Medicare taxes on that. We would pay a capital gains rate and not that. So every election I hear somebody talking about carried interest and getting rid of that loophole. It's not. But again, that'll add another 10 or 15 years if they got rid of that. And then full retirement age, they've already been stepping that up, and the studies have shown that definitely it's going to keep happening. From there. So we could talk, 20, 30, 40 years just by getting rid of that cap and extending the full retirement age, for that. So, good question on that. Try to not jump around too much. So am I going in order? Yep. Dustin says, given the current housing situation, how do you suggest I explain my financial decisions to my future grandchildren when they ask why we live in a van? Yeah, I mean, that's something I have, I don't know if you see, I'm a grandpa now. We have, 6 kids, 4 of them grown, 2 of them are turning 18 this year, soon to be 4 grandchildren. And my entire life, we have seen, we'll just kick the can down the road to the next generation. And in 92, the person who attracted me the most was this guy who was buying television commercials and holding up flip charts and saying, well, here's the deal. If we keep going in this direction, we're just never going to be able to do it, and our country's going to be bankrupt. And everybody said, oh my gosh, this dude's crazy. Why would we vote for this crazy old guy? He's right. It's just taken so much longer to get there. But, we were talking with our kids who are, spread out against 2 generations. Some are millennials entering their late 20s, early 30s, and others are teens, considered in Gen Z. And you look at rent prices, you look at mortgage rates, what's happened in housing prices to most of the country. And I don't know how to explain to them and say, look, I'm sorry that for 30 years I just said, well, this is how politics work. So I just say, as parents, we can be role models. We can talk about fiscal responsibility, and we can talk about, I don't like swaying people's opinions. I didn't like my parents telling me why this person's evil and why I shouldn't vote for him, but we can educate them about that. And the hope I have with both millennials and Gen Z, at least my children and their friends, is they get it. They understand that we can't just keep spending money. They understand that Social Security probably won't be there for them, but we also can't just rip that Band-Aid off and say, well, we're ending Social Security in 2033. Sorry, guys. So I feel like we'll come up with some solutions, but I don't know how to explain it to the children. You can live in a van. Dustin, I know your wife, and she would not go for it. Neither would her mother, because I've asked. But it's something that we have to take care of our own retirement. This isn't a plug for SEM or our financial advisors that you work with. It's a plug for financial advising in general. It's up to you to control your finances. That's why we have the TikTok and Instagram and Facebook feeds where we do videos. Is you have to start as young as possible being fiscally responsible yourself. We can't trust the government to take care of our retirement. It hurts. It hurts what's happening with inflation. It hurts what's happening with mortgages and rent prices. And we can't just keep voting for people because I believe they're the lesser of two evils. We got to get involved at the local level and start finding people who represent us with that. So I think, let me jump around to somebody other than Dustin. I don't quite understand. Anonymous had asked at 1 o'clock Eastern if only independents win anything, right? I'm not sure that question. So if you have some clarification, maybe, retype it in the chat. But what I was saying is independents swing the vote. They're kind of losing out, though, because they don't have somebody representing them. My twins jokingly have been sending me videos from RFK. He's doing push-ups with his shirt off to show that he's healthier than the other old guys who are running, I think is his point. When I started asking him how they feel about his stance on different things, they're like, well, I didn't know he stood for that. So I think independents are losing out because they don't have a voice, and they just have to pick, well, who do I believe is best currently for the situation? Madison asked, do you think Social Security will go bust? What is your response to clients that want to take Social Security as soon as possible, even when it is worse for their plan because they are afraid there won't be around in 10 years? That's a great question, Madison. I have great hope in future leaders. And I'm not saying this to be mean, but obviously demographically, baby boomers aren't going to keep controlling the vote. And we're going to have more and more younger voters voting, which means we're going to have younger politicians who understand, everybody, including myself, who had millennial children as a Gen Xer, criticized the group project stuff that we saw millennials doing. But millennials in general are a more outward focused generation, especially as adults, and they understand there's people who need Social Security. So I am in no way saying Social Security is going bust by 2023. So whether you work with an SEM advisor or not, please do not make a decision on Social Security until you've talked to an advisor. It would be utter chaos in our country overall for all generations if we just pulled the rug out from under Social Security, because about half of baby boomers have less than 100,000 saved for retirement, which means that money is probably gone to support their standard of living in about 2 to 3 years, which means they only can rely on Social Security. So if we ended Social Security, we would have 20, 30, 40, 50 million homeless elderly people in our country. So we can't do that. It comes down to, and this is not financial advice because you do need somebody who understands Social Security, it's a numbers game. If you're in really good health and you have good genetics and you're going to live past usually the break evens like 81, 82, waiting till full retirement age is going to pay tremendous benefits. But if your family has a history of cancer or people dying younger, you're not in the best health, it might be in your best interest to take it early, but it shouldn't be because you believe it's going to be insolvent. And I hope nobody took that away, as I believe we'll come up with a solution. Brian's question asked about just removing the cap on Social Security. That gives us another 20 years to get through it. So please, don't take anything I'm saying and don't be scared into believing that Social Security is going to be bankrupt and you should take the money now. Talk to your advisor about that. So hopefully that answered your question, Madison. Anonymous, are we going to have a country in 5 to 10 years with all of the unskilled, uneducated workforce and a heavily regulated tax economy? Lots to go in there. I actually, again, as a split generation parents, having such a big divide in ages from our kids, I saw all the positives of the millennial generation, just because I thought their friend groups were great. Maybe it's because they were all great kids and had a good group of friends, but they were all good people, all outward looking, trying to help others while also taking care of their financial situations themselves. And then we've seen this shift. This isn't a political statement, but COVID really ruined Gen Z. I saw it with our twins who were phenomenal students pre-COVID. And they just, the school systems had to shift, what they were learning shifted, their attitudes towards learning shifted. But something we've also seen, and I've talked about for a good 15 years, is we have all these skilled people who are retiring, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, you name it, they're all retiring, and we don't have people to replace them. And there's such if you've tried to hire a tradesperson, it's hard to find a good, reliable one because there's not as many out there. And what we're seeing in the peninsula of Virginia, and I believe we're seeing in the other parts of the country when I talk to advisors, is because of the cost, because of the financial divide of that K-shaped economy, there's a lot of people who aren't going to a four-year college to get a degree. And I think that's good news because they're going into trade school. They're becoming EMTs and firefighters and plumbers and electricians and mechanics and healthcare workers who don't need a four-year degree. And we're filling that in. One, they're going into it with little or no debt. In Virginia, if your family makes less than about $92,000, your trade school is paid for. I mean, that's the average American is $87,000. So if you're at average or below in Virginia, your children get trade school for free. They'll probably enter the workforce making between $40,000 to $60,000 a year in a trade with no debt. So compare that to a four-year degree that might cost them $50,000 to $100,000 with debt and the salaries that are promised. So I think we're going to have to go through a shift, because you don't create this new skilled workforce overnight. You don't bring in manufacturing back to our country overnight. You don't, you honestly don't get the economic shift that we need where we import less than we export. You don't start paying down our debt until we do reshore jobs and we do build factories, and we don't have the workers right now. But each of the next 4 years, there's going to be more 33-year-olds than the year before. The average household formation in our country is 33 years of age now. It used to be 29. So that means we're going to have more households forming each of the next 4 years, which is spending, which is generating economic activity, which is entering that period of adulthood that I think will help offset a lot of the problems we have in our country. So I'm optimistic that we do have a gap in education. And I've seen firsthand that the education you're paying for in a four-year degree is not necessarily worth what you're getting, because we have to train people anyways how to do our job. They aren't getting the deep education they have, or we need them to get a CFA certificate or a CFP certificate to get the education they need anyways. So I'm not as pessimistic as this anonymous question was. So we'll go from there. I've talked a lot. I'm not sure if we have any other questions that are coming in. Oh, we do actually. So again, feel free to jump off. I know I rambled a lot, but there are a few more. If you think of anything while I answer these, keep going. And I'll jump into the questions we had from the registration. So I apologize for not seeing these sooner. Brian, I think, asks a great question on, with the height of the stock market, is the time in the market still better than timing the market? Should any new money for the market be dollar cost averaged in versus a lump sum investing at these new heights? And not to punt on this, but I'll say it depends. It depends on your financial situation. It depends on your time horizon. If this is money that you've just had parked in a low risk account and now you're wanting to pile it into the market, I would be very wary of that. Dollar cost averaging, works really well over the long term. That way you're buying sometimes at highs and sometimes at lows. And so if the time horizon for that money is 10 years, you might start stepping it in a little bit every month until you get fully invested. But if the time horizon is 30, 40 years and it's coming from, and it's a smaller percentage of your account, time in the market for somebody with a 20-year time horizon, you could buy at the very peaks of the market. And if you're in a well-diversified strategy, yes, you're going to have some drawdowns and losses with that money, but time will be on your side. Because like I said in the last question, I'm not pessimistic that in 10 years, we're not going to have a country. And if we do, what you do with your investments aren't going to matter. You know, if our country's imploding, we're all in some dire situations, and our investment or our 401k balances aren't that. So dollar cost averaging, and if it's a large lump sum, it's usually better whether we're at the highs or the lows in the market. If it's a long time horizon or a low percentage of your account, time in the market is very important, so long as you're diversified and you're not just buying some of the hot stocks right now. Eric asked, what do you expect the housing market to do following the election? And does who wins make a significant difference? I'll start with saying I'm not a real estate expert. Other than 2007 and 2008, we haven't had a US-wide recession in housing. You know, housing is localized. Our part of the country, we're actually in I think the third fastest growing county in the entire country, and the second largest in the state of Virginia, behind Loudoun County, which is up in northern Virginia, where you have Amazon and all these businesses opening data centers and things like that. But housing is tough. And again, going back to the conversations I had with my millennial and Gen Z kids and friends, that K-shaped economy is really playing out, because the baby boomers are not necessarily, they're downsizing square footage, but they're not downsizing price. So they're selling their family homes and reducing their square footage to a single level, but still very big house. And it's still almost a, equal exchange. Also, they don't, they might have used their capital gains exemptions, et cetera, et cetera. So the prices keep going up. And the problem the Fed runs into is if interest rates go down, you might unlock housing, because there's a lot of people who can't move because they're locked into 2 or 3% mortgage rates. And then you might actually see demand going up, which causes prices to go up. So I don't think the election will have any bearing on that. It's going to come down to, I know Biden has proposed some policies to give first-time home buyers like $1,000 a month. As I remind people, whether it came to Obamacare or free college education, when you make something easier to pay for, it causes the price of that thing to go up. So yeah, we might give people $1,000 to buy a house. All that's going to do is increase demand, and it's going to cause prices to go up. I haven't seen any policies that'll help unlock it. It's going to come down to interest rates and how we kind of right size the housing market. Multifamily stuff is a huge shortage. We've seen it with rent prices. We need maybe some plans to help more multifamilies. I know from speaking to my kids and others in their generation, yard work is not as attractive as it was to maybe baby boomers or Gen Xers. So more multifamily developments could help kind of offset things. So sorry, Eric, to not really tell you, in your location what it might do, but it's going to come more down to interest rates and how that impacts the upper end and the lower end of the housing market on that. Couple more questions, I believe. If you have any more, get them in there. Bob asked, impacts of the social upheaval, short-term and long-term on the market. That's a great question. I've been concerned for a long time about social upheaval, and we're kind of getting through that cycle where we're seeing a tug of war of the ideological baby boom generation, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, of what they did, but they were very stuck in their ways, and they helped divide the country. And you've seen a big divide in Congress as they've been in control, but they're losing percentage of voters, and now you have the percentage of millennials who outnumber Gen X by a long shot coming into power, and that's causing some friction. And Gen X has always been there to cause friction, and they'll have a very temporary short time of leadership because the Gen X generation size-wise is very small, and they're also ones who kind of, they'll state their opinion and they don't really care who they impact. They just want to get things done. And as you go through that, that's definitely going to cause it. But think of, so Bob asked about the market. And think of the social upheaval we had in 2020 and 2021. It kind of smoothed out in 2022. And what I thought should have happened with the market based on just the social mood is not what really happened. Now, obviously, it hurt the economy, but the market bottomed at the end of March 2020, just as our country was imploding on itself with the social uprising. The economy obviously struggled for quite some time, but the stock market bottomed. So if you saw the social upheaval start Memorial Weekend 2020, and you just got out of the market, you missed on, what is it now, close to 100% gains in the S&P 500, some nice gains even in the bond market before 2022. So we shouldn't assume that social upheaval is bad. Now, it will eventually hurt spending, and there will be things. And that's the other thing. We're going to have recessions. It's just what happens is recessions will happen because we get a disconnected economy. And so with that, we will have blips in the market. We will have that. And social upheaval will be a part of it, but more so because we're going to see economic policies change. So don't assume just because we have an upheaval and a big divide that the market's going to go down. Now, short term, yeah, we'll see a lot of noise. We're at significantly higher valuations than we should be, in my opinion, based on the underlying fundamentals. We talk a lot about that in the blog. So short term, we would be at more risk if we do see some upheaval. But long term, I don't think we have to worry too much on that. So another question, it's said with a smile. It's asking about deep fakes of political nature and AI and things like that. And I joked that we're just going to have our director of technology host a 3-hour webinar Q&A at 7 o'clock one evening, because talking about AI, talking about deep fakes, talking about the dangers that we have out there on the internet, and because of that, it's getting harder and harder to tell if something is real. And this has to do more with social divide and what I have talked about a long time, and I think it's gotten way worse. We saw 2020 social media. We've seen the reports that came out as far as social media maybe hiding things or pushing things, but the algorithms are designed to feed you things that you interact with. So if you're liking posts and sharing posts, those algorithms of whatever your preferred source of media is saying, hey, Jeff really likes posts from this person. I'm going to keep sharing those. And so it makes us more prone to being susceptible to a video that somebody created of the opposite party saying things that might not be true. So finding the truth is getting more and more difficult because of deep fakes. And it can impact things. Again, the independent voters are the ones who are going to swing the election. And if something takes hold and it becomes a belief, it's really hard to change that belief. And I used to, I loved my newspapers, hand delivered, but, during COVID, it became, they stopped delivering them all the time, and it became easier to start getting them on my tablet. And then I started using Apple News because it was kind of a way to see, well, what's everybody in the world reading? But I've noticed in the last 2 months, and maybe it's been happening longer and I just didn't pay attention, Apple News is now sending me things, and I'm like, why am I only getting Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and Barron's and MarketWatch articles? I'm not getting Los Angeles Times or Chicago Tribune or Atlanta Times Herald. I'm only getting these news sources. And I started looking into it. Well, there was a setting in Apple News that was tailoring my news feed based on things I've clicked on. And so now I'm not even getting independent news in what I thought was an independent news source. So I would encourage you to not take anything you see, even if it's a video, as fact. There's a site called AllSides, ALLSIDES.com, that I will go to when I'm seeing big news headlines. And even, hey, the payrolls report came out. What are they saying? We talked about the debt. And there was a report. Go to AllSides and look up Trump and Biden debt. And the news sources on all sides will tell you, well, who's on the right, who's on the left, and who's on the central. Here's the headlines of this same data point. Of course, the people on the left said Trump adds way more debt than Biden. Okay, factually that's true. As I mentioned, you have to give him an asterisk because Trump was president during COVID when the stimulus checks went out through a Democratic Congress. The Democrats controlled Congress in 2020, so they should take part of the blame on that. But the article on the left completely blamed Trump. The one in the middle had basically the asterisk of, but most of Trump's debt was during COVID, not pre-COVID. Biden's added more post-COVID than Trump did pre-COVID. That was the center article. And the one on the right said, Biden and Trump add just as much debt. So, it's, the spin that these news sources take, you have to think for yourself, and you have to know the algorithms are feeding you things you've interacted with, and you have to purposely seek outside news sources and make sure it's independent, and All Sides is really good about that. So keep going. Last one, because Dustin is just almost trolling me with some of his Q&A. I'm trying to get me going. But Karen, it's not even a question, but just a comment. She said, very informative, well done. I hope you guys feel my heart and feel our drive, which is data. We're definitely going to have to host a webinar again, probably September, October, because we'll know a little bit more about policies and what's likely to happen based on the polls. We can't trust the polls, though, because, again, the independent voters may or may not show up. We know how we know how 60% of Americans are going to vote, because 30 are going to vote Republican, 30 are going to vote Democrat. The wild card is independents, and how many of them will feel disenfranchised to not even show up? How many will feel just frustrated at that? How many will vote third party? Will there be a third or a fourth person on the ballot that changes state outcomes? So please stay with us. Please, if you're interested, subscribe to the blog. I'm going to keep trying to share our opinions. If you work with SCM through an advisor and you have a specific question or concern, I'm not going to write it off. I'm not just going to say, haha, the data says this. You're silly for thinking that. No, I care about what people think and why they think it. So I'd like to have a conversation. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know it's a very long time to spend on a video. Appreciate anybody watching the replays. If you have comments, hit us up on the website. So thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.